Well, it's a real pleasure to welcome Lani Evans to Seeds Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's one of those things where we've known each other for actually quite a long time now because we move in similar circles in terms of the purpose-driven organizations and work and things. And we often bump into each other at conferences or, oh, there's this thing happening here. But I've never yet been able to talk with you for Seeds podcast. So you've been on my list for a long time as someone that I really wanted to talk to because the problem is going to be you've been involved in so many things. How do we how do we work out what we talk about? But I'm really keen to find out a bit about your background and your history, and then usually working out, well, how does that impact what you're doing today? And Fundsorter is an initiative which I think is a really amazing thing. I was just at a meeting yesterday of a charitable trust talking about funding, and I said, "Did you know that there's this new initiative?" And I've sent them an email this morning with the link and said, you need to check it out. So we're definitely going to dive deeper into that. But my opening question is, what was life like when you were 5 years old?
It's a good question, isn't it? It definitely puts you into a different headspace. So I grew up in Brisbane, in Australia, and we grew
Mhm.
up on the outskirts, a place called like around Logan City. And so when I was five, my dad was a school teacher, and he taught children or young people with significant intellectual difficulty. So he was what was at the time a segregated system, and so he worked at a special school. And my mum was a social worker. And so she ran a volunteer program helping mostly older people stay living at home for longer and not having to be institutionalized. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and where we lived was sort of semi-rural. It was really hot, and I think I spent most of my time riding my bike around the neighborhood and getting in water as often as possible. Like the local farmers dam and little streams and things. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I lived for 4 years in Sydney. So I had a bit of Australian experience as well. And I remember going to Brisbane and it is significantly hotter,
Yeah,
there, isn't it? It's like you're getting quite high up.
yeah, absolutely. And we also lived out rurally enough that some of the kind of cliches that people used to ask me about were like kangaroos going through the backyard and like koalas in the tree. Like that was actually part of my
All
childhood.
right.
There was kangaroos that would go through our backyard. There was a koala that lived in the tree just outside my bedroom. And that sounds very nice, but they're actually very noisy
All
creatures.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Your parents, they both sound like really interesting people. What had led them to both get into what sounds like kind of a caring type of role that they were both doing that?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever asked them exactly what led them into those roles, but I would say that they're both very, very patient people and they're
Hmm.
very community oriented people. So that sense of responsibility and care for the communities that we live in, and that sense of social justice and a need for us to have a more socially just world was definitely a strong part of my childhood. So I
Mm.
imagine that's a lot of what drove them into those spaces and has then been passed on to the rest of the family as well.
Yeah, interesting. Because this is why I like these interviews, because instead of just starting with tell me about Fundsorter, we get to go back in time and kind of trace a little bit of the history of the individual. So for you growing up, when you're 5 years old, everything, it's just normal because this is what you grew up with. At what point did you realize my parents are involved in these jobs and activities and the social justice side of things? Was that something through your childhood that you were like conscious of, or was it later on that you look back and go, they were really, involved?
I definitely didn't realize it when I was a kid. We would do volunteer work and lots of, community activities and things, and that was absolutely normal for me.
Hmm.
My mum sat on the board for Women's Refuge, and that was totally a normal part of my life. I don't think it was until I was in high school that I realized that that wasn't actually um, what most people, or not most, what a lot of people didn't grow up with.
Hmm.
And I feel like that realization happened at multiple stages. As they first oh, this is not quite how we do things. But even when I was uh, in my early career, talking to people and realizing that they didn't do volunteer work as well as their jobs. I was like, oh, well, what do you do with your time then? How do you connect to the people around you? So it's I think it's something you learn over and over again.
Yeah.
That the privileges and the experiences and the values that you grow up with aren't necessarily reflected in the world around you or in everybody's experiences.
Mm. And in a way, probably looking back, it's kind of a special kind of privilege that you were given those values from an early age, that this is what we do, this is normal. I'm kind of similar in the sense of both of my parents were involved in a group called the Peace Corps, which was a United States based initiative. They were some of the first volunteers back in the mid 1960s. So this is going
Oh,
way back. But they went to the country of Chile, and they were Peace Corps volunteers working. And basically, what they would do is go out to poor communities or impoverished places and help set up cooperatives or help local people with different things. But anyway, the point is, I didn't know that that was like an unusual thing. I just grew up with the sense of that that this is part of who you are, that you actually serve in your communities. So yeah, kind of similar.
it's that what do you
Mhm.
swim in, isn't it? And that's what I hope that, and I'm sure for you as well, that I hope that I pass on to my own children is that sense that actually being part of a community is a really important part of being a human, and being able to
Mm,
contribute positively to that is both an obligation and a responsibility and a privilege.
yeah, for sure. Well, this will be themes that come out through our talk, I can guarantee it. So, coming up, thinking as you're getting into sort of high school years, and were there particular areas of study that you enjoyed or didn't enjoy? Like, what was it that motivated you in your teenage sort of years?
So I was uh, a fairly rebellious teenager. Um,
Hmm.
so I did well at school, but I was also pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in the school environment, and that included some bad behaviour. Nothing too bad, but it also included things like helping to organise a high school walkout to protest against nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific, and a range of things like that. So the when I think about high school, I think about activism and learning how to be an activist in that space. I don't think so much about the academic pursuits that occurred there. I think more about how did that operate as a training ground for some of the work that I got into later as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And were there other fellow pupils or other people that you were connecting with and to organize these things? Or yeah.
Actually, in life school, not so much. So when I was doing organizing and activist work as a teenager, I was mostly doing it with groups of young people from across the region, so from across Brisbane rather than within my own school environment. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, uh, it was in some ways an isolating way to operate at that time when I think most of us are, and I was absolutely self-involved and deeply self-righteous and all of those things. But I think that's what a lot of young people are, right? They're self-involved. And so, it could be hard to get people to, as a cohort, to look at the horizon
Hmm.
of some of those other challenges and how
Yeah.
we can be active participants in changing them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So it started pretty early, this idea of having a voice and maybe making change or appealing to authorities to stop doing something.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, absolutely. And I would say I can't remember a time when that wasn't part of the driver for me, like from becoming a vegetarian at 10 to like organizing protests at 14 to like pushing the boundaries of what the school administration was willing to take.
right, right.
Yeah.
Wow. So when your 10-year-old self, what were you thinking about at that point? Had you read something or that appealed to you?
Yeah, yeah. So I read I can't remember what it was called, but I can picture the book. I read a book about animal rights and the environment and was like, right, I'm going to become a vegan. And my mum was like, you can become vegan when you can do the cooking, but you can become vegetarian now. So yeah, that was really motivated by environmental impacts. And again, growing up in somewhere like Brisbane where there is constant water distress, uh,
Mm,
uh, and also the expansion. We lived on the outskirts of the city, but the areas around us were getting cleared at that point. It's no longer the outskirts of the city for this urban sprawl. Those environmental issues felt very present.
Mm, mm. It's really interesting because I'm just thinking about today, because in the last few years, there's been quite a lot of climate action protests from high school students.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like because was it nuclear cause that you were mainly focused on at that point? Yeah.
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 Gee.
Yeah, I mean, it was like I think the French government at the time was doing nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific, and that was what we
Right.
were specifically responding to.
Hmm.
It was that particular one resulted in a high school walkout across Brisbane of about 4,000 young people. I was a minor part in that, in no way a leader, but I think eventually there were sanctions put in place against the French government from the Australian government. And I think that group of young people who were involved in that were all like, we did this. I'm sure we were a very small part of it, but it was a very empowering process to go, actually, as young people, we can make decisions, we can push for
Mm,
change and then
mm.
actually see something happen as a result.
Yeah. And
And were
maybe
you also a like activisty young person?
I didn't organize any walkouts in high school. I think I've always had a sense of what's just,
Mm,
and feeling because I had lived in Chile when I was 12 and 13, and so I saw poverty right in front of my eyes, like literally little children coming up and asking for coins, and they just had nothing, So I'd seen that the society was not just. But I wasn't taking the steps that you were taking at 14. It wasn't until later in my legal career that I realized maybe I could use the law degree to actually have impact. Because, as you know, I help in the last year, our team has helped about 40 charities to set up, and so I'm very active in supporting and helping. But yeah, not as a teenager. Yeah. Mm.
It has been
So
amazing to watch you using the tools of the legal system, not just to support charities, but also to support businesses and social enterprises as well,
yeah,
and to put out all of those white papers and thought pieces that can help people shift their thinking about how do we use the current structures and systems to create a different world.
yeah. I always think of it like a river, and we're on this side of the river, and the other side of the river is the future. And so it's a wide river, it's raging, it's quite deep. We can't just sort of walk across it. So what we
Mm.
need is some stepping stones to get from where we are today to where we will be in the future. So my role in this moment is to try to create those stepping stones. This is the legal side, so that hopefully we can get across and to where we will be. And then I think it's that intergenerational perspective. 100 years from now, companies will be viewed differently. What's our role in helping the next generations to think of them in a more productive, responsible way? So, yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, yeah, it's
I
very
guess you
similar.
could call it systems change, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So, you're getting towards the end of high school, and you've thought through quite deeply different issues like this. Did you know what you wanted to do next? Or, I think later you did some travel. What was on your horizon in terms of I'm finishing my high school, time, and what am I going to do next?
So as well as I guess the general high school environment and all of the usual subjects, I was really into arts-based subjects. So I did a university course while I was at high school in fine arts, and then I went on to what I decided to study was film. So I wanted to make documentaries and tell stories that would help to change people's behaviour.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so that's what I did. I went on to study at the Queensland College of Art
Oh,
and did a film degree. I focused on documentary, and then did an honours degree in animation, traditional forms of animation. Very
wow.
different to what I do today.
Yeah, that's interesting. But that's why I love these conversations because I didn't know that. That's really good. Yeah. And the film as a medium, what was it that attracted you to film as the way as opposed to another, I don't know, photography or painting or something else?
I think that film has the ability to show multiple perspectives at once. It has the ability to bring in elements of reality and have those treated in subjective ways. But there's a level of, I guess, truthfulness that can
Uh-huh.
come through in the media of film. What I ended up being more and more attracted to over time was the idea that actually documentary isn't objective; it is subjective. It's told through the lens of the subject and the lens of the filmmaker, um, and that you can manipulate people's responses through the way that you position the camera, the way that you position the frames in front of you. And so where I got to was a real passion for animated documentaries, where we use the audio from interviews and from people's lives, and then create animated images to go with that. And what I really liked about that was that you were making it clearer that this was a person's voice and this was somebody's interpretation of their reality.
Mhm.
It was, yeah, really beautiful and a really interesting way to get to interact with the world.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. It kind of is combining um, kind of the art side or painting or graphics with the narrative and the storytelling and the voices and
Yeah.
is that something after you'd studied, is that something that you ended up doing or what happened next?
So it turns out that traditional hand-drawn animation is not a particularly vibrant career pathway. So I did make a few short films. I worked on a couple of feature films, and then I actually ended up moving to New Zealand um, to make a rock climbing documentary, and so that's how I landed here. Um, uh,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I spent my first year in Aotearoa hanging off cliffs with cameras and filming interviews and rock climbing with people on all of the best crags on the South Island and the best kind of mountaineering areas in the South Island. And yeah, I really fell in love with both the outdoors that I had the opportunity to engage with, but also as a community that I found very quickly when I landed.
Hmm. Wow, that's amazing. Was rock climbing something that was also a hobby or you'd done that as well? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I was
Hmm.
very into it for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you spent was it a year in New Zealand doing that? Yeah. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and you did it result in a documentary or is
Yeah,
it
it
out?
did.
Can we find it?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you can find it now. It was a long time ago. It resulted in a documentary called Southern Faces. And it did well. It won some film festivals. It was sold on DVD
Yeah.
um around the world and did quite well in Europe and in Japan particularly. Um
Hmm.
yeah, and it was just such an amazing way to land in a place and then get to talk to people who have been in all of these different regions who were so passionate about like the history and the geology and the environment in these areas through the lens of rock climbing.
Wow. So it had the action sequences like the actual rock climbing, but then the interviews with the people about some of their journeys and
Yeah, yeah, and some of the kind of geological facts about New Zealand and yeah, yeah, it was delightful. And at that time I don't think very much had happened in that space
Mhm.
in Aotearoa.
Yeah.
Mm.
When you're making a documentary like that, is there, yeah, at the beginning, is there a theme that you're trying to get out or express? And is that guiding the people that you're talking to or shaping the questions you're asking them?
I think this one was mostly about demonstrating the beauty and the possibilities of these places that we were looking at. And so
Mhm.
the way we approached it was to talk to and film both extremely good rock climbers doing very difficult things and also somebody who was average
Right.
doing something that was really accessible. And so it was kind of like, okay, you could go to this place. Here's a bit about it. Here's why it's magical and appealing and what you might like about it. And like, here's what you can aspire to. And here's
Mm,
what we could all probably do if we tried for a while. So it was
yeah.
really about trying to engage people with both yeah, with the places and the possibilities that were inherent there.
Yeah. That's really great. And I can see kind of synergy with the nature and the importance of nature in terms of revitalizing us as people.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of different things where people get out into nature and they talk about fishing or going tramping or in my case, I love going gold mining, which is a very niche type of activity. But
Amazing.
the actual reason that I do it isn't. Well, it would be nice to find a gold nugget, but it's very rare that that would ever happen. It's actually about getting out into nature, realizing that the rain on my face, the feeling of it, and the sun, and now it's the moon, and I think there's a big part of that, isn't it? Some of these hobbies, it's one of the key things is that you're not in an office, you're out communing with nature.
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, whatever I've done, whether it's like running or mountaineering or climbing, it's always about one just that experience of being humbled. Like if your problems
Mm,
fade into nothingness when you're in the presence of environments and landscapes and geological formations that are going to be there, have been there for a
mm.
long time and will be there so much longer than you. So it's
Yeah.
really it helps for me. It helps me to locate myself within a much bigger picture. And it really takes, I guess, the pressure off to like be everything or to be,
Mm,
but also it just reminds you that we're just a little speck. And that's
yeah.
actually a really lovely
Here
reminder.
for here for a short little breath of time, really. I've just returned from South America where I was traveling around and we went to see Machu Picchu, which is this amazing city on top of this amazing mountain, basically. But when you're looking around, you're realizing this has been here for thousands of years. It's like
Yeah.
we're just a little tiny blip on its radar. So yeah. Well, I'd love to talk a bit more. So you're in New Zealand, you're enjoying the beautiful scenery, and I totally agree with you because, as you know, I'm based in Christchurch. We're always going out and seeing. Yeah, what happened? What happened next, and what were some of the things that you got involved in?
Yeah, I think so. After that, I did a traverse of the Darrans mountain range with a group of really wonderful women. So we did an all-female traverse. It was 2 weeks. We kayaked Lake Tiano one day, then we ran the Milford Track the next day and climbed Mitre Peak the day after that, etc. For 2 weeks. And we did that uh, in partnership with Rape Crisis. Um, and what we were doing, one, we were having a great adventure, and two, we documented it and we used it as a tool to get into school, into classrooms, and to talk about help seeking behavior, about physical challenge, and also about sexual violence. And Rape Crisis at the time was really struggling to get access to schools. So we helped them to get access via the phys ed departments so that they could then talk to a wider group of young people. Um, and I think that experience for me was really transformational. I was like, oh, making documentaries and having adventures is fun, but this is so much more important. That's right. And that really led me back into doing community work.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. I just interviewed Alison Moore
Yeah,
so she's
from
got this
Tika.
amazing Tika the initiative, and that was one of the themes we were talking about was in that case, sexual violence and how to make it more available for people to realize that they're not alone, that it's not just them. Yeah, I'll in the show notes, I'll cross link over to her episode because it was really cool.
Yeah, please do.
Um,
I love her work.
yeah, yeah. So that gets you back into that space. This is going to be the problem with this interview is I know multiple things that you got involved in. I'm afraid we're going to have to jump, hop, and skip
That's
because I
fine.
really want to get to Fundsorter as well. But can you tell us, because before the call, we were just briefly chatting and you mentioned that you'd gone to Ecuador for a while. Where does that fit in the sequence here? And yeah.
Ecuador was between, so I finished university. I couldn't get a job in hand-drawn animation. I went to South Korea for a year and I taught English and
Right.
then saved up my money there with my partner at the time. And then we spent the
Yeah.
next year mostly volunteering in South America. I came back, met some people rock climbing as soon as I got back, and then came to New Zealand. So it was a A quick
So,
sequence.
so that was the sequence. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I taught English, but in Japan. So
Oh
I
yeah.
was there for a year in Osaka, teaching English, similar type of, make some money and then came back. Oh,
Like,
that's great.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, at what point did you realize that New Zealand might be the country for you? Um, was it, yeah, after all of these travels and then South Korea, Ecuador, how did you end up settled? Because you're based out of North Island now, right?
I am. I'm based in Wharirua now, but
Yeah.
I was in Dunedin for a really long time in Port Chalmers. It was almost immediate for me. I mean, I landed in Aotearoa. I landed in the Dunedin airport, which at the time, like, it was like flying into like a sheep field, right? Like there was that they've done a lot of renovations since then.
Yeah.
So I landed there uh, in the evening, got in a car, drove at night, and woke up
Hmm.
at a place called Homer Hut, which is in the Darren Mountains, just before the Homer Tunnel, heading into Melbourne Sound. And I remember just waking up and being like, oh, um, and just feeling this real sense of being able to kind of exhale and
Mm.
feeling really settled almost immediately. And I feel very grateful that that's an option and has been an
Hmm.
option for me. And I feel extremely grateful for Te Tiriti o Waitangi to allow me that opportunity.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I love that. I moved here when I was 8 years old. So for me, I have an accent, but I actually grew up here down in Otago, actually, near Oamaru. It's a place called Papakayo. And I've
Yeah.
always felt similarly because I've traveled quite a lot. Like I've worked in London and other places, but whenever I land back, it's almost like the light and just the feeling as I get off the plane and like, oh, here I'm home. So I definitely feel that sense as well.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
lovely. Yeah, it's yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the yeah, let's jump over a couple things, but what else were you involved in before you got involved with Fundsorter?
So I guess the key projects, or big picture things that I was involved in that intervening period where I ran the volunteer centre in Otago for a while, and set up a youth program there. I ran
Hmm.
a national youth organisation alongside someone called Billy Matheson, called Regeneration, for a few years, and that was
Hmm.
working with young people to help them have the tools and skills to be change makers around activism, etc., in environmental and social, around the environmental, social, and cultural issues.
Hmm.
Um, and then Thank You Payroll, which I was involved in for many years, which is a social enterprise payroll company,
Hmm.
um, which we've gotten to interact with a few times.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, and then Vodafone Foundation was the other big piece of work now, the Te Raro, the one Aotearoa Foundation, which is a youth specific funder. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's wonderful. And at some point, then you moved to Porirua. Was that around the Thank You payroll time or
It was
before
actually
then?
when I started working with Te Raro, because we were working as a national funder focused on young
Hmm.
people, but young people around the country. It became more and more difficult to be based in Dunedin.
Right.
Um, Yeah, and so here was a more central place, so easier for me to travel, easier for me to connect with people in different parts of the country. But I do
Hmm.
desperately miss Tiwai Pounamu, so I'm sure that moving back is on the cards in the near future.
Yeah, nice. Well, next time you're down in Ototahi, let me know. We can catch up.
I love
Um,
that.
before we move on to fun sort of, I'm just curious. You mentioned the hand-drawn animation and how big a part of your life that was. How do you think that, I guess, the drawing, the animation, the thing, how has that shaped the way that you look at the world?
Um, I think the magic for me of traditional forms of animation is you sit down with nothing and you create something that looks and feels alive and can tell a story and can, move people. So you have nothing and you have to create the whole thing. And you have to be
Hmm.
thoughtful about that and you have to plan ahead and you have to have a big vision because it's an extremely time consuming process with very few rewards along the way. Um, and I think that's actually how you do entrepreneurship as well.
Yeah.
You start with nothing, but just an idea. And then you have to work out, how am I going to turn this nothing into a thing that can change people and move things and tell a story?
Hmm.
So I think that there's strong threads there, even though they're not necessarily obvious ones.
Yeah, no, well, that was what I was wondering because I help a lot of startups and entrepreneurs, and sometimes I see this tendency to think that it's going to be handed to you on a plate, like
Yes.
you've got the idea, well, where's the money to fund it? Because it's a wonderful idea, and not realizing that a little bit like animation, it's going to be a lot of hard work along the way before you end up with the short film or whatever it is. So it's just interesting to me that you would have learned those skills at a relatively young person, and then thinking through that actually does apply if you're building these types of organizations that are actually having impact. It's the bigger vision of what it could be, even when you're looking at a blank, nothing is there.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's that sense of possibility, that believing that um, if you lean into it enough, that you'll end up with something tangible at the end. And that's not always true. I mean, I've had bad business ideas that have turned into nothing as well
Yeah.
as good ones.
You have to be able to screw up the paper and throw it away as well, right? But
Yeah, and
knowing when to
hopefully
do it.
relatively quickly.
Yeah, yeah. And on Thank You Payroll, I'm really curious because I know a couple of years you made the founders and everyone involved made a pretty big decision about the ownership structure. Do you mind just talking that through? Because I think it's a really interesting model that you've landed on.
Yeah, so Thank You Payroll is it is a social enterprise. It was always set up as a business with social purpose at its core. So that was always one of the values that was woven through. But we had lots of investors. So we had just under 200 investors.
Mhm.
And during the COVID lockdowns, the board and one of the co-founders, Hugh, who is my husband, had time to think about what they really wanted the business to be, what we really wanted the business to be. And it was the best payroll company and an exemplar of what business can do to make positive change. And so obviously we're continuing on the being the best payroll trajectory. But what we decided to do around the business was what's called an exit to community or an exit to steward ownership. And so what we did was we got a company valuation, um, which is a dark art. We got uh, we got some financing options, and essentially the business bought itself back from its shareholders. So we engaged with all of those shareholders. We made an offer. They agreed, or 98.7% agreement that they were happy with it. And then we bought the business back off of our shareholders and transferred ownership to the charitable trust, which I sit on the board of, which is Generous Ventures. And at the moment, the business is still paying off that debt mechanism and will be for a couple more years. After that, though, all of the dividends that would previously have gone to individuals will instead go back to Generous Ventures, who will then reinvest that in community. And I think it's a really beautiful process. Everyone in that wins, like community wins in the long run because there's going to be lots of money going to them. The customers win because every time they're using a service, they're contributing to community outcomes, and hopefully it's the best payroll company in New Zealand as well.
Yeah.
And then shareholders also won as well because they got a good return on their investment.
Mm.
Um, and I'm just really excited about the idea, like what would New Zealand look like if we had 20 or 30 successful companies going through this process and all returning dividends back to community rather than to individual? Yeah,
The phrase that we've talked about before is steward ownership, and the
yeah.
idea that actually a business or an organization, that it's sustainable, it's making profits,
Mhm.
but the primary goal of it is not to return to one person, one founder that one person then becomes exorbitantly wealthy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I I hope that it gets taken up as an example that other people could emulate because I think this is about the role of companies themselves in society. Really, if you think about it, it's because the capitalist model would say, well, those wealthy people who were the founders or the owners, they're going to get lots of money, but they're then going to give it back. They're going to do good in this community. But the reality is that I'm sure there are people who are generous and they do give some, but it's not the same quantum as a business which is actually owned for a purpose. So yeah, a shout out to all of the people involved in Thank You Payroll and in the trust. And yeah, it'll be fascinating to see it growing. And maybe we can put links to things in the show notes. So
Yeah.
let's make sure we put a link to Generous Ventures and some of the initiatives, because I think you're encouraging that if other people want to join in this, that they could actually pass over some shares, right, to the trust.
So we also have we have a separate so the generous ventures, the steward ownership model. What we do have is some really good kind of guidebooks that have just come out in the last week that I
Mhm.
can link to about how people can do it for their own companies or the companies they're
Okay.
part of. For people who are just wanting to donate shares, there's also Share Collective, which is a charitably held share portfolio where people donate shares. We hold them in trust. And when dividend repayments or sale events, liquidity events happen, we then donate that money back into community. So,
Okay. Great.
yeah,
Well,
I
let's
think a
link to
bit,
both of them. Yeah.
yeah, please do. But I think a bit like yourself, it's like, how do we already have shareholding mechanisms. We already have like business mechanisms. How do we take those and make sure that they're contributing to us as in a communal way rather
Yeah.
than again being focused on individual outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah, and to use my picture at the start of the interview, talking about, well, what about 100 years from now? Because I think in the future, my hope would be that we actually have an evolving view of the role of companies within a society, that actually there would be ways to use them as a means to have employment for people, be producing good, sustainable products and goods and services, but also that the profits would go towards sustainable things rather than just to private, individuals or shareholders. So yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, we'll link to all these things. Everybody can learn a lot more. And I've written some on steward ownership as well, so we can link to those things. Um, so Fundsorter, how did that come on your radar? You've been in the ecosystem. You're very familiar with charities. You'd helped with the foundation. Yeah, what was the background? And tell us a bit about that.
So I guess I've been working in the philanthropic space for about 10 years now. And a lot of that has been focused on running foundations, but also thinking about how can philanthropy be more equitable? How can philanthropy improve its practices? And it does. People are always thinking about this. But when I was on parental leave with my daughter, um, we had an economic downturn. Things were really challenging for lots of organizations. And I was getting calls from 3 or 4 organizations that I didn't have a relationship with each week, asking for help because they were really struggling to find enough money to find the resources that they needed to continue, even though they were providing really deeply needed services. And I got a bit overwhelmed. I couldn't support them all with a newborn. And so it was around the same time that generative AI became a consumer product.
Right.
And so I started talking to people about, well, could we solve some of the problems that we know about in the philanthropic space, in the funding grant making space, using generative AI? And so I was lucky enough to get Alana Irving and Josh Weil and Rod McDonald on board
Mhm.
as co-founders. And we started building in October 2024 and launched to the public in July last year.
Mm.
And so what Fundsorter does is our goal is to make that whole funding burden as easy as possible. So reduce the funding administration and reduce the funding burden for community organisations. So we have a database of all of the contestable funding opportunities in New Zealand, about 2,600 of them at the moment, and we're kind of still getting a couple in each week.
Mhm.
Um, so organizations sign up with us, they give us their website and some documents. We read through that, our system reads through that, creates a profile of them, and then they tell us about their funding needs. And there can be 100 different funding needs, as many as they want. And for each of those, the system will go through that 2,500 opportunities and say, okay, well, here are the 30 that are actually a strategic fit for you. They're willing to give out there about the amount of money that you need, in the time that you need, in the region you need for the cause that you're doing, and they're willing to fund whatever this is. And then if they like those opportunities, they can hit a button and our system will draft up an application for them. So, on average, organizations spend about 20 hours on each funding application, and we can get that down to about 30 minutes. Yeah. So,
That's a great overview. Thank you for giving us that. I think it's an example to me of AI, these new ways of doing things, technologies become powerful tools that help us be more efficient and, 2,000 potential funding sources. That's quite a lot to go through. So, yeah, yeah. And in a way, it helps to reduce probably some of the funding fatigue because many of these groups that have the money to do the funding probably get applications from people that are not at all within the scope of what it is that we fund children and young people, and they're getting applications from who knows what else. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
I
we
can,
wouldn't show, we only don't show people any of the funding opportunities they're just not a good fit for. So
right.
hopefully we reduce the amount of poor quality applications that funders are receiving while
Yeah.
increasing the amount of good quality applications that community organizations can actually submit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
No, I really like it. We're going to put the link so that everybody can go and find it and, sign up and have a go. Um, I'm also conscious that the other way, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, is funders have a responsibility to be clear about what they're going to fund. So
Yeah.
I've seen before where funders, they literally will say, we fund children, education, climate, youth, drug use, like the list goes on and on. And I saw one funder where they posted on LinkedIn saying, we're pleased to announce we've received, 757 applications for our contestable funds of, you know, per per application, you're only going to get $100 or whatever. So I think there's a something to be said for funders to be clear about what is our target area as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I do think that there are some funders like the class four gambling that are very generalist funders and very transactional funders, and we
Hmm.
actually need some of those in the system as well. But I
Hmm.
do think that funders need to think about that funding burden. And Kate Frickberg wrote some great stuff about the funding burden and at what point does it cost the community more to apply for your funds than you're providing. And I mean, an example for me was not that long ago, there was somebody who was putting out one grant for less than $10,000 and they got like 2,000 applicants.
Wow.
So, like, how much did that cost our community for what was probably a vanity metric for them,
Yeah.
rather than something that was actually generative for community? So,
Yeah.
we can
Well,
also
if you
use
take
the
the
data
stats
we
that
have. Yeah.
Yeah, if you take the stats you just said, like if on average it took, you know, let's say 10 hours an organization and 100 organizations apply for this funding,
Mm.
then, well, do the math. That's a lot of community that could have been spent on other things.
Yeah, and that's
Everything
really our
Kate
play. Yeah.
everything Kate Frickberg does is helpful and useful. So let's link to her website as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
that's great. So if people are interested, they can come to the website. What would be the pathways to start using? They can play around with it and see. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a free trial option. It's just for kind of going through the whole process once, so people can do a free scan and to find matches and a free draft application, and then they can make a decision about whether or not they want to join us. Yeah, we've got about 800 organizations in the system at the moment, and
Oh,
obviously
wow,
that's
great.
growing all the time. It is doing the things that we hoped, and we just came back from a strategy retreat, and so we've got lots of new features and improvements in the pipeline as well.
Mhm.
And alongside that, one of the things that we have is we have a lot of data on funders and on funding. And so we're just late last year, we released a report on what do funds explicitly prioritize. And that was really interesting and illuminating, I think. And the next thing we'll be looking at doing is what do funders prioritize or what do funders explicitly say they want to fund? And how does that compare to what they actually fund? Are there
Mm.
differences there that we should know about? We don't have a lot of good data on funding in the philanthropy sector in New Zealand. And I
Mhm.
think that means we often operate on assumptions or historic information that's no longer relevant. And so we're hoping we can really help with that transparency.
Mm. That's great. Well, let's link to that report as well. That would be good. I'm just thinking one of the things that I try to encourage charities to do. So this is the subset of philanthropy thinking through like it's basically how do we move away from a purely Oliver Twist mentality, which is please can I have some more,
Mhm.
and move towards a more sustainable model or models. And I'm just wondering, how does this fit in with that? Because one of the things that I would hope charities or groups that need funds would do would be that they're not just purely reliant on the
Yeah.
generosity of others, because at some point that funding might dry up. If it's government funding, then the policy shifts and oh, we're in trouble. And one thing I try to encourage groups to do is to think, are there any income streams that we could get which are not, please, can I have some more income streams, but they're actually building maybe a business or something that the charity owns. Do you have any thoughts on that?
A few. I think one is that what I hope that our system will do is mean that they're spending less time
Hmm.
on traditional grants, so they can reduce the time on that, and that gives them capacity to look at other things like building relationships with individual philanthropists or looking at social enterprise models or doing fundraising activities. So I think
Yeah.
we can help people by creating the time and the space for them to diversify their income streams. In terms of that social enterprise idea, I actually think it's very difficult. I think that the mindset to run a successful charity and the mindset to run a successful business can be quite different. And that it's not realistic for all charities to be able to generate their own income. Um,
Hmm.
we need these services to be funded so that they can concentrate on them.
Hmm.
So I think it's a mixture. I also don't know that there's very good support for
Hmm.
charities and good advice for them to set up their own social enterprises.
Yeah.
Um, and I
Yeah, I
think,
definitely see that. And I do help them, like
yeah,
I give the legal support to them to get
yeah,
the legal structures right. And I think you're right. There probably for some charities, it wouldn't be something that is a realistic thing, and they need to rely on the funds to come from donors. But for some charities, I think they could have a blue skies session and realize that we want to support poor people to get into housing.
yeah.
Maybe we could have a social housing project where there's actual financial return which goes to investors. And I speak because I'm the chair of community housing funding agency,
Yeah.
where we're raising money basically from investors to go to community housing providers who are usually charities. But they get viable income streams by providing the housing, achieving
Yeah.
their purpose at the same time. So it's kind of a subsector of philanthropy where it can work. But yeah, it's interesting to me. I think you just have to keep all the tools available to you on the table and
Yeah.
ultimately ask, how can we achieve our purpose and what's the best way to do it? And sometimes it's just, donations, but other times there might be some income streams that they should explore.
Definitely. I think you're right. People should understand all of the options available to them and then make a decision about what's most appropriate for their organization. I do think
Yeah.
it's really important to remember that about 40, it's either 42 or 48%, so forgive me for the inaccuracy, but 40, let's say 42% of charities are volunteer led and have income under $40,000 a year. So they also
Yeah.
don't, we need to look at the spectrum and the capacity. And the vast majority of organizations do not have the human resource or the time and capacity to set up a social enterprise. They're doing things like local trapping or, my son's soccer club. And so I think it's always important. I think no critique of you, but I think we often talk about when we're talking about philanthropy and when we're talking about community, we're talking about the bigger end of things. But, New Zealand runs,
Yeah.
Aotearoa
The
runs on
small.
tiny organizations and
Yeah. Yeah.
they hold our communities together. They hold our social cohesion.
Yeah.
So I never want us to forget about how valuable they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
That's awesome. Well, we'll put some links in the show notes to everything that we talked about. So just remind me maybe or send me an email with all the links that you can think of.
Yeah.
And one encouragement I have for anybody listening or watching or whatever it is that you're doing, maybe consider sharing this interview with someone who would benefit from understanding what Fundsorter is, or post it on social media. Let's try to raise the awareness of a group which is doing some good in our community. And then from my perspective, I've enjoyed our friendship over the years, and we didn't get a chance to work it in, but Edmund Hillary Fellowship is something else that we've both got in common, which has been a really interesting grouping of people coming together for purpose-driven initiatives. But the thing I've enjoyed about our conversation is hearing your childhood, and thinking about your parents and the role that they played in your life, but then also the activist 14-year-old organizing events in high school. And you can kind of start to get a picture of, okay, I see the character, I see this person. And so then it makes logical sense to me that this would be an initiative that you're involved in and starting and getting going. So yeah, thank you for all the work you've done over the years in all of these variety of organizations. And we'll be watching, see what happens next with Fundsorter.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation too, and it's really nice to see, other than the ones we already know about, those connection points that we have in common as well. So thanks so much for the kōrero and for the
Yeah,
opportunity.
no problem. Thank you for joining me.